Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everyone. Save the best for last. I think we could all probably agree that this topic encapsulates a little bit of everything that everyone has already mentioned. And it is something that we have all been talking about after every visit to the caves and to the museums. These conversations haven't really stopped going. So I guess this one was kind of an easier one to talk about, but also it was a little tricky to put it all on paper. But yeah, so we will be talking about the visitor experience. And we have all been a visitor this week. So it is all of our experiences as, let's say, tourists, as well as researchers and academics. But what we'll also be touching on is parts of sensitivity, as well as pleasure, the sense of wonder, and of course, the feeling of authenticity that everyone has also touched on. So the meaning of authentic, we Googled this and we thought we'd give a definition because we've all been talking about authenticity and what it means to be authentic. So Oxford Languages has said authentic means to be of undisputed origin and not a copy, something that is genuine. And the Oxford English Dictionary as well has said something that is legally valid or having proper legal form. So maybe that gets a little bit more political, but in a sense, it's just the originality and the fact of genuinity. Genuinity. Yeah, being genuine. So what we also wanted to talk about was authenticity in heritage. So something we also looked into. And being authentic in a context of heritage is when the properties are truthfully and credibly expressed through a variety of attributes. And these attributes we really wanted to touch on as well in our presentation. And they are quite important. And yeah, so for example, some of the attributes that we found were form and design, traditions, techniques, and management systems, spirit and feeling, location and setting, and really it went on. So yeah, the part of sensitivity, something that maybe we can all chip into. But sensitivity, yeah, it's something that does need to be talked about within the context of rock art and rock art interpretation. And a definition as well of sensitivity would be that sensitivity implies that you withhold judgment of cross-cultural practices, or maybe this is more sensitivity, cultural sensitivity rather, actually, and that you can deal effectively with these differences. So what we also talked about is, yeah, sensitivity in the way that rock art is interpreted. So obviously, there's been a lot of focus on a European audience when we visit these cave sites, and also dealing with certain narratives. So what was mentioned a lot in some of the excursions we went on was this evolution from Africa. And it was interesting, as you know, we have all been coming from Africa, that they mentioned this. And it was just something that, you know, stuck with us. So it could be a sensitive issue, but, you know, there's these similar narratives today across the world, this whole out of Africa experience. But then also once you're in the cave, they talk about, you know, the European Neanderthal and the modern Homo sapien, the Cro-Magnon, all this stuff. So also with sensitivity, what we wanted to touch on was, I don't know where the slide went actually, but what we were talking about was how with sensitivity, a lot of sites in Southern Africa have been, say, discovered by white men as well, and they retain the names that these were given. So of course, an example being the White Lady of Brandberg, not being a lady, in fact. as we can see here. So just dealing with these kind of sensitive issues. I don't know if anyone also wants to talk about this. Kaarina, maybe. Sorry, put you on the spot.
Now I'm on the spot because I'm from Namibia. But okay, cool. The White Lady of the Bromberg. Yes, it is a white lady, but it's not a lady. It's a man, because then some pictures, most of them now on the internet, they don't have the genital part of a man, but there are pictures, or there were pictures with that. But then also, as you can see in the picture, I don't know if it's only in my head, but hunting was also associated with the men. And if you can see in the picture behind me, this person or the painting is of somebody carrying bow and arrow, which during the hunting time, and even now, I know the Bushmen people are still hunting. Hunting is associated with men, and then women are doing other things. So I don't understand really how it is a white lady who was maybe hunting. And then also this white lady, like now, is for the longest time now, it have been in the curriculum, and from grade 4 now. And then I remember with myself, we once had this school tour when I was growing up in school, or in primary school, and we went to see this white lady. Guess what I was looking forward to see? Not a painting. I was looking forward to see a white lady. In and then there is also the story of or the interpretation of trance and shamanism. Could be a medicine man who was going into trance, or yeah. But also in university, I remember when I was having archaeology 2, if I'm not mistaken, we had these 2 interpretations of the white lady. So hence we brought in this issue of sensitivity. So what is it then? This is just a question that I'm putting there, with the interpretations of what we get sometimes at these either in cave arts or in interpretation of rock arts. Could it be sometimes the interpretations are to a certain extent sensitive to some group of people, given either the group represented, but like I remember the lady that took us through LASCO 2 yesterday said, we don't know. She keeps saying, or she keep emphasizing on, we don't know, we were not there. So whatever we are saying is what we see, or what we feel, or what we think those who made the art were thinking during that particular time. So whatever we say is more of our feeling, but sometimes we forget that it's sensitive to some people or some group of people. There I end.
So something also to note already, this draws on the issue of authenticity, because the omission of certain details already removes a lot of the, truth and authenticity of these paintings. So the minute you go on Google and you're looking for the White Lady of Brandberg, and you're not even finding an accurate picture of what the painting looks like today, it's just already this set, idea, and how these omissions have stayed as part of the narrative and like what's being spoken of today. So how the White Lady, we haven't even changed its name. It's just the White Lady still today, even though we know better. Already drawing on authenticity. And then another example would be with the South African coat of arms. So as you can see, the circles shifted a little bit. But the painting of a male figure from the Linton panel, and how it has been, already you see some details omitted, and how it completely changes the narrative of what's being depicted in our coat of arms. They're trying to show a sense of unity. You know, the figure has been copied and pasted symmetrically, and now they're holding hands. But also, like, you know, the details that are missing, what he's holding, and just drawing again on this idea of authenticity and also the sensitivity. So what are we trying to tell here? Like, what story are we actually trying to say here? Yeah, and then going into some more lighter parts of the visitor experience, pleasure. So what we've done is we've taken some of the aspects of what we have experienced here in France as part of the visitor experience, and then what we'll also do is relay it back to Southern Africa. So how it is back home and how we can also maybe take ideas from this and improve. So with pleasure, we saw a lot of these forms of control within the cave. As I mentioned, a lot of us were chatting after going on an excursion, and there were very different ideas of what was happening within different caves, so different visitor experiences. So forms of control, for example, Rouffignac versus the Font de Gomme, and in comparison to Peshmerga. So with Rouffignac and Font de Gomme, it was, as many people had said, it felt really restricted. You know, you either on a train or you're being told where to stand, where to sit. And then also the issues of lighting. So a lot of the times they were mentioning how it's for conservation, but at the same time, when you're in a cave and you know, they keep saying, well, there's bare scratches everywhere and there's paintings everywhere, but then they're only lighting up 1 or 2 images as you go past, or have been placed in front of the image that they want you to see. So this was something that does affect pleasure of your experience, because you may become unhappy, you may become more disgruntled while you're in the cave and you're being told what to do, what to look at. And well, yeah, just with Peshmerga, it felt, again, drawing back on authenticity, it felt more authentic because you actually got to see the whole cave and you got to walk within the cave and you just got to experience it as, even though the lighting may have been different to what it was back then, you still got a sense of the size and, you know, being able to just go at your own pace. So a point here as well, there's just no time to reflect in some of these caves or go at your own pace. And then, yeah, what we had brought up was this idea of like selling the product. So what images they're wanting you to see, what they're trying to tell you in a cave. Yeah, and then again, space and the feeling of being confined. So, but back home, maybe this is something that needs to be developed. So many of our sites are not as easily accessible. With a lot of the caves we went to, you can just kind of drive up to them, park nearby, walk up, you go through the big steel doors and maybe a bit intimidating, and you're already in the cave and you get to experience it. But for us, a lot of the sites are harder to get to. There may be a longer hike or you're in a more remote area and then there's bad roads and maybe potholes and maybe there's no parking. And the other issue we talked was lack of signage. So you don't even know where to go if there's no sign pointing you to where to go. And then also with pleasure, there's also the need for keeping the audience interested. So I know also maybe you guys can also mention experiences, but, you know, taking a group to a rock art site and you're going on this walk and people get tired and crabby or they're hungry, and then you actually get to the site, everyone's kind of unhappy. You get to see the view and you're like, wow, finally, you know, made it to the top. And then you turn around and you're like, okay, well, we actually have rock art. Like, let's go look at the rock art now. So maybe just a need for keeping people happy. It's difficult to manage a group in that sense, but yeah, just keeping in mind people's pleasure on an excursion is something important. And then the sense of wonder. So in France, yeah, there's a lot written here. We were brainstorming a lot. But money, a lot of these sites and museums are quite well funded. So you can see this as a tangible result. However, some of these replicas lack a sense of wonder because it becomes impressive due to its quality. So you may no longer be in a cave, and for example, Lascaux 4, where you're seeing this really impressive replica, but now, you know, are you appreciating the guy we also met, you know, who actually repainted these? Is that now what's become impressive? And then it does also remove its feeling. So a lot of what people were saying is being in these replicas, it's kind of like the disconnect. You're not really feeling the same as how you feel within the actual cave where it was painted. And then also dealing with the expectation as a general public versus academics and researchers. So we all came into these caves with our own ideas and academic backgrounds. However, we need to think of, if we were tourists, say, coming from Spain or Germany, as a tourist, how would you actually feel? Like, I know we all have these big thoughts and ideas, but you got to think of how the general public who are viewing these sites are seeing it. I think, you know, we've been talking about the public and how to present rock art sites to the public, but we have more of an inside view of this. So we actually need to be putting ourselves maybe in their shoes and seeing how it would be for them, you know. And then also the guides, they do really make or break your experience, a lot like teachers at school. And also just the importance of their knowledge. So it does seem like some of them have a choice of what they do want to tell the public, and this is what was mentioned in the previous group's discussion. And then what we also noted was the balance of facts and storytelling. So I guess this was also mentioned just before, but like, what is factual? So what are we wanting to tell the public as facts, or these interpretations as law, yes, as he was saying, how there's these many different interpretations, but then also if you want to say, well, you know, none of these could be true, then you're also essentially saying there's no interpretation. But what's also interesting is in France here, there's more of a storytelling aspect. So a lot of the books in the gift shops you see, and also say at Lascaux 4, like the dog running, and you can hear them calling the dog because the dog found the site. It adds to it, and you don't really think about that back home, but the sense of storytelling, it really, you know, it does add to your experience. It kind of puts you in that position of how maybe the people who found the site felt, which adds a little bit to it because it adds to that sense of wonder. Because now, if you imagine, okay, well, maybe my dog came across this hole, I crawled down this hole, and then I see all this rock art around me. Once you are in the actual cave, for example, then you do have this addition of awe and wonder because it's really cool and impressive. And then also the guides with their appreciation for the art. I think that's also a big thing. If, you know, maybe they do 10 tours a day as one guide and they get tired and it does become more factual, it loses a bit of its spark. That is important because if you are a tourist paying a lot of money and you have, say, 5 days or 1 day in France, you're coming to this tour, and then your tour guide who's tired and he's been doing 5 tours already today, and he just has lost this appreciation for the art, and he's just saying, here's the bison, next. Turn the light on, here's the horse, next. You know, that's not going to be a good experience. You're going to lose that sense of wonder within a cave. Or with even in a museum. I mean, if your guide in a museum isn't really interesting or helping you have fun and wonder, then your experience is already going to go downhill. And then also with the guides, it does sometimes become subjective because their interests can also be imposed. So I know at Lascaux 2, the guide, she was saying how when she became a tour guide, she kind of read up some books, and then became a tour guide, learned, got taught how to manage a group, but then whatever she had learned is now what she's telling us. So already that becomes subjective, because what did she decide to read and tell us now? It's maybe it needs to be more well-rounded, and yeah. And then back home, the sense of wonder, obviously it's great because we can be out in the environment. We're not really restricted within a cave, even though it could be really cool. But yeah, there's actually, again, bringing in the sense of authenticity. You are in the real place. You get to see the sky. You get to walk up the ground, the trees, the actual land. It's not really built on. It's just very real. And that does add to the wonder. And then mentioning with the pleasure, the wonder and awe upon getting to the site after a long or hard walk or hike. You get up there and you finally, we made it, and then you look around, and then once again you turn around, you're like, okay, well, we're actually here for the rock art. So maybe that is something that also needs to be developed back home. And this is a big thing because maybe there's a lack of suspense and build-up of the visitor experience. So a lot of these tours that we've seen in France has been the suspense, and it does add to your experience. You get excited. Maybe they say, oh, it's going to blow your socks off, but they're still attempting and trying to build up your suspense to see what you've come to see. And I think that is really important, and maybe that is something we have been lacking at home. If you're walking up, maybe just keep in mind that you are going to see the rock art, or I think it's the suspense and the build-up is just something that is important. It really does add to your pleasure and experience as a visitor or tourist. And then the feeling of authenticity. Back home, we do have a lot more spiritual sites. Maybe, that's not something that's heavily focused on here. But what we also mentioned was who has seen these actual sites. So more of an example for Lascaux. There becomes this sense of imposed authenticity because we have these tour guides we know have never been in the real Lascaux, and yet they still have to present Lascaux to you. So already they don't have the authentic feeling of being in Lascaux, and now they're trying to give you the feeling of being in Lascaux. It is an imposed authenticity. And then also, beyond the human perspective, I think this is something that we were talking with Megan about. So, example, like the environment above Lascaux, already lacking authenticity. It's become so restricted. Like we were talking about how, even like maybe the animals aren't even allowed on top of Lascaux anymore. It's just so strict, and it just loses its sense. And then another thing that we mentioned, and some of us have also been talking about, is with the feeling of authenticity is, well, also mainly specifically with Lascaux, that is the main, site for talking about it. But, so much money is put into conserving Lascaux, and for who? For what? Are we just protecting it? But why? Just so it just can stay there forever, just, restricted and taken care of, but no one ever gets to see it again. So that's just another question that we can ask ourselves and think about. And back home, and again, the feeling of authenticity. So visits to the real sites, there aren't really any replicas in Southern Africa that I know of cave sites. Someone can correct me on that if I'm wrong. No? Okay, no replicas. Okay, so there is, one or two, okay. But maybe not as, huge like Lascaux. Yeah. So what maybe you can also mention, I think this was a point you brought up, but this intangible access to the sites and shelters, the spirituality that we have access to now back home. And also that we relate more to the figures and animals portrayed in the art of Southern Africa, because in France and Europe, on a larger scale, there is a disconnect because of this gap in time. So for us, it is a lot more real. And, another thing that we've all been talking about and discussing in previous presentations, but how we do relate more, and this does add to the sense of spirituality within caves. And yeah, this point here, lack of connection and issues of access to sites in France. Not sure why this is put here. I'm trying to think of something to say. Yeah, okay. So issues of access to sites, this is another thing, just not being able to go into many of the sites, and they're just kind of staying there static in time, with no one ever being able to go into them again, maybe. Which also then, you lose that lack of connection, especially as a tourist. If you can't go into a site, you have to go into a replica. Yeah, it's just what we've been talking about. Oh, and here it is. Most of our sites were found by white men, and we still keep the interpretations today, and we still keep their site names today. So already, this in itself also just the loss of authenticity, because why are we still keeping this? Especially like the interpretations, maybe old interpretations, and it does just become, stagnant, and we're not really working with it anymore. And just why are we still keeping these site names when we could, becoming more local, including different names today? And then something we wanted to end off with, maybe a topic of discussion. We actually found some reviews of Lascaux 4 that we can chat about. And these are the good ones. So as you can see, all 5-star over here, saying amazing cave paintings, so difficult to believe it's not the real thing. Just talking about how beautiful and awesome it is. However, you get to the bad ones, and you find some that say it's a grand site without much heart. And talking about Lascaux 2, this is really small to read. Maybe you guys can read it bigger on the screen. But at the bottom, I highlighted it here. So apart from the Lascaux reproduction, the rest of the Stark building seemed more like an architectural wonder searching for a purpose. So that's something interesting, and maybe it's something we haven't really talked about. And then here again, extortionate cost for mediocre experience, a huge disappointment. The so-called accurate reconstruction of the original cave was completely lacking in atmosphere and was like a children's play set. Not my words. A waste of time and money. Had a horrible experience. They did not cater for English-speaking tourists. So again, what we're talking about in other presentations is being brought up here in the visitor experience. Talking about the headsets and, the audio guides and buyer beware. It seems a lot of this is talking about the cost, especially adding in the cost. It's interesting. And just talking about how this is not a cave. So maybe there's also an issue with the advertisement of the cave here, because if people are coming all the way to France to see Lascaux, shock, you're not seeing the real thing. Do your research beforehand. But that's it from us. Maybe this is a good place to end and discuss. But we can talk about everyone else's visitor experiences. Thank you.
Je passe celui-là. Ah si.
Thank you, group. Was it group? Or group one, for your presentation. A nice contrast between Southern Africa and the experiences you've experienced this side. What also stood out for me here in France is that even open cave or open shelters were turned into caves, like the Blanc, Le Blanc. And I'm not sure if Cap Blanc, yes. I'm not sure if now there's this memo of creating caves so that this issue of the idea of storytelling can, be, part of the whole with the other caves that we've been to. And I think with us in Southern Africa, most of our caves are open. And it's difficult to have the storytelling of the big reveal. Here's the back line. Doom. Here's the thing, because the artist there is visible, The moment the tour guide is talking about this eland chasing a woman, whatnot, another group is already looking there because the light is visible. That's my visitor experience between France and here, that it would have been nice also to be taken to open shelters to see the visiting experience or how the tour guides tell the story or explain the art. And also, what stood out for me here is they didn't care if we were academics or researchers. We were just treated like normal tourists. And whereas back at home, the first question you get asked by a tour guide is, they already know if you're an archaeologist or you're a tourist. And the moment you tell them that you're an archaeologist or you're a rock art person, the narrative changes or the interpretation changes. It's like, okay, you know this. I don't have to go into details. You know this. Whereas if it was just a normal, just a general public going to the site, then that's where you hear the real fiction and the ancient art and how the eland got stabbed and all these narratives that some of them are true, but some of them, you can tell like it's just to create this story that we have experienced this site. And I think that makes a huge difference because I think in Lascaux 4, the tour guide was like, I'm just going to treat you like normal tourists. He made it clear. And when we went to Cap Blanc, the lady asked if what are we? Are we students? And what field are we in? And I explained to her that we're doing archaeology. And she understood, and the explanation was different, I think, from the other tours that took us that we had experienced. I think that also plays a huge role in our experiences, and also the time we had visited the site. It's not bombarded with visitors, so the guides are not tired. And I would imagine when it's summertime and they have these lots of group, the experience that we have experienced now, it was going to be different, probably, So I think those are things that we need to bear in mind.
Just something that you mentioned with, mentioning whether you're a student or an academic. It's interesting because that also does add to your visitor experience. If I go on a trip and I'm treated or, being told the same thing as everyone else, but maybe I do know more. I think maybe it's more specific for back home because, say, we do know. Versus here, you do want to be taught as, or, shown as a tourist or general visitor. But back home, when you have a tour guide, sometimes it's nice to mention that you do this stuff because you can have a deeper conversation. So that does add to it because I don't know, maybe that's also just subjective. That's my opinion and feeling on it. But if you are being guided as, everyone else is being guided, and then it can be a bit more simplified in your thinking because you know more, and you should just tell them, well, actually, you know, I've studied a little bit of this in high school or first year university even. Then it can be nice because it adds to your experience. You can actually talk to them a little bit more and engage with them a bit more if they do know more than what they're just telling the general public. But yeah, that is also just maybe my opinion on that.
It's a part of the job of the guide to analyze his public and to adjust.
Sorry, before you ask your question, probably just elaborating on what she said, which is also very important when it comes to visitors' experience. Like you said, the timing or we are here in winter, but should it be summer, it was going to be very busy and a lot of people here, and what we probably got, the experience that we got is not what we're going to get. Taking it back home, I visited both Tweefontein and Brandberg as just somebody with different groups at different times. And sometimes I was guided by the same person, but one can tell when you are having this visit in the morning, like your first or the guide's first visit, and when you have it maybe around 4. Around 4, this person is exhausted. They will just, like, it's supposed to be an 1 hour session or work, and you get that visit in 20 minutes. But then they also don't know that you have been around for a while, or you have been coming to this site maybe 3, 4, 5, 10 times, and like I said, it's the same person who is just really giving you this information depending on what time you get there. So thank you for that as your experience here and also relating it home.
Mine's a slightly different take as well. I realize that a lot of the narrative that's built around the French art is what Erin's been saying repeatedly. It includes the excavated materials. So they build a bigger picture of what the people wore. You can see how they dressed. You can talk about the Ice Age, all of those kinds of things. And I think there's a tendency in South Africa to separate the art. So we kind of talk about the art and we don't bring in the bigger picture of the context. And I think that's something that we need to think about more carefully going forward as well.
To add on to that, this thing about interpreting through the art. I noticed sort of here as well, actually, that there is this interpretation of the artworks through the framework of thinking about the artiste, which is also a very strong interpretation, I would say, because, I mean, it's on one hand, it's a way to get the audience to resonate, feel, engage, find a kind of relationality. You're looking at the art lines, as we saw, the little red dot. And so there's so much emphasis, and the lines are very bulbous and kind of, you know, sometimes you can see that there's one stroke or that there's multiple strokes. And that sort of framework of the artist, I think, needs to be also analyzed and in accordance with the time when this artwork started to really become popular, because a lot of it also leaves you with this feeling that there is this artist, and the artist is separate from the community. This is a special person, and it's usually a person who's doing this, and then sometimes they are revealing it to the rest of the cave in a moment, just like this person is doing right now. And that's quite a strong narrative. Who's to say that it wasn't a group of people doing it all together, that there wasn't some kind of, you know, there's a lot more that can be thought through in that, but I haven't got any of that because there's no evidence. But also, in the lack of evidence, there comes the narrative, right? Because you need to sort of story it to people in a way, and the storying just happens. So, yeah, that's to sort of add on to what Mandy was saying. I was also curious to think about the moment in the, was it in, Lascaux is so interesting, was it in the 60s when everyone went into the cave, too many people, when it was open and then closed. Was it in the 1960s?
They closed it in the 60s.
They closed it in the 60s. That was the
so
peak.
it was probably like 50, 60 that they peaked, yeah.
Yeah, and then a sudden drop after that, and no one going back in. Yeah, I was just, curious at that point if that sort of maps onto where that style of, I mean, that really imprinted in the public's imaginary, that those amounts of people going to rock art. I don't think we can draw parallels to South Africa in that sense. And I actually think that I think that the caves and the people going to visit rock arts now might still be running off of the fame that they received at that point. I don't think South Africa's had that. I mean, Southern Africa hasn't had that kind of level of fame for rock art. So also just to bear that in mind when making comparisons, that, to reach a public imaginary for rock art through maybe printing rock art on various things, or kind of, doing really interesting innovations. I think that they were able to leverage that because of that kind of fame at the time. And so really thinking it through a local context makes a lot of sense. Like, for example, thinking what was mentioned earlier, like what value is held within communities, and working through that, maybe, different trajectories might be needed to reach a level of public engagement and sense of awe and wonder that is needed. Yeah, just some thoughts on that.
Okay, no more question. I have just a look on the time, and it's very late in the afternoon. Perhaps, Melanie, you want to conclude this session, or because I think it's time to go. And
Di Makhotso. Group number 1, applauded.